Hi everybody, thanks for joining me today. This is going to be the first video in a new series that I'm starting called Nature Observation. And today what we're going to do is we're going to walk the landscape, go out into nature and see if we can find signs of autumn. There are certain things that most people notice about being autumn, like the temperature gets a little colder, the days get a little bit shorter. And later on we're going to talk about why that happens. Most people don't realize that it has to do actually with astronomy. It has to do with the way the Earth and the Sun interact within the year as the Earth goes around the Sun. And I'm going to show you in a classroom setting on a diagram exactly how that works. Here we are in my makeshift outdoor classroom. I'm going to try to use this diagram to show you how the seasons change throughout the year. What this diagram represents is the Earth in 4 positions around the Sun at different times of the year. We have the summertime, we have the wintertime, and we have the fall and the spring. One of the most important things to notice in this diagram is this line that I have right here going through the Earth in the different positions. This line actually represents the axis of the Earth, this being the North Polar Axis, this being the South Polar Axis. The most important thing you need to notice about the axis of the Earth is the fact that it's tilted. So I know it's a little difficult to wrap your head around this because this is a 2-dimensional diagram and obviously the real world is 3 dimensions. But imagine that the Earth is going around the Sun in this direction. The most important thing you need to notice is this line on the Earth, which represents the axis. The fact that it's actually tilted instead of being straight up and down to the direction that the Earth is moving around the Sun. So it's tilted 23.5 degrees. That tilt is actually what gives us our seasons. When the northern hemisphere is pointed towards the Sun, we're in our summertime. And the reason for that is the Sun's rays are more direct, which heats up the Earth more, and the days are longer. When we come over to wintertime, one of the things that you'll notice is that the North Polar Axis is actually pointed away from the Sun, which means the Sun is lower in the sky, the rays of the Sun are not as intense, are not as direct, which makes the Earth cooler in the northern hemisphere. On the other hand, if you look at the South Polar Axis is actually pointing towards the Sun at this time, and the southern hemisphere is actually having their summer while we're having our winter. So what does all this mean in the real world? Well, one of the things that it means is the Sun is constantly changing its position in the sky. And depending on where the Sun rises and sets determines our seasons, how warm it's going to be, how long the day is going to be, and so on. So what we'll do now is we'll walk out into a field and we'll take a look at the eastern horizon and see if I can show you the different positions that the Sun rises throughout the year and how that might influence the seasons. So I'm heading out into the field to see if I could find a spot to do my demonstration to show you where the Sun rises at different times of the year. The grass is pretty wet this morning. It's kind of a cloudy, dreary day. It was raining this morning, but this is actually, I think, a pretty good day to show you what I want to show you, because the sun's not too bright and the sky is pretty evenly lit, and I think this will work out. Here we are in a field with a really good view of the eastern horizon, and I made this little sun on a stick with my phone as a compass to show you the different directions that the sun rises at different times of the year. Now if you want to do this, what you need to do is find a spot on the ground where you're going to stand in the same place every time you do this observation. It's very important because if you move around in different places, the background is going to change and you're not going to be able to see how the sun actually moved from place to place throughout the seasons. Now we're at the equinox. So at the equinox the sun rises due east and sets due west. So due east is 90 degrees on our compass, and if you look at the background you could see that the sun would rise just a little bit to the right of that big pine tree. Now, as the seasons move on, the sun continues to move south in the sky and rises further and further south as the days go on, till it finally reaches its final point as far south as it's going to go in the southeast. On a compass, it's about 113 degrees. So if I was standing in this same spot, I would see the sun rise above those big trees over there at the winter solstice. Now once the winter solstice and the sun is furthest to the south, the sun again starts to move east throughout the winter, and the days start to get longer and longer until it eventually reaches 90 degrees again, and now we're at the vernal equinox, or the spring equinox. And the sun would rise again at the same spot, just to the right of that bigger pine tree in the background. From this point on, the sun will continue to move north and rise further and further north until we get to the northeast, and about 72 degrees on our compass. This is where the sun would rise on the first day of summer, which is the summer solstice, and it's the longest day of the year. As you can imagine, it was very important for ancient people to know where the sun rose and sunset at different times of the year. And the reason for that is the sun and the stars were actually their calendar. And one of the things that ancient people used to do is they used to build monuments to actually show where the sun is going to rise and sun is going to set. And there's a lot of ancient monuments still today on Earth that scientists believe were used for astronomy, to show where the sun rises and where the equinoxes were and where the solstices were and so on. But to do this activity, all you're really going to need is 3 stakes, a compass, and that one spot that you're going to stand all the time. So what you do is you take your compass and you find the different directions that you're going to walk, and you look on the horizon for something to walk towards. And you're going to walk the same amount of paces every time. This way it's accurate. Okay? So let's start with this. We're going to start with east. I'm going to grab one of my stakes. And I apologize, I'm going to have to put my back to you, but we're going to take a look east. Now we already know from doing the experiment before that just to the right of that pine tree is where due east is. So I'm going to start at my spot, and I'm going to take 4 paces away from that spot, walking towards that. So, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Right here, we put a stake in the ground. That stake is going to represent our equinoxes. So the next one we're going to find is the summer solstice, which is the furthest north that the sun goes. So we're going to take my compass, and I'm going to try to find 72 degrees and pick something on the horizon. And we already know where the sun comes up because we did the experiment before. And I'm going to take that, and I'm going to walk my 4 paces again. And 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Line it up with that point. Stick your stake in the ground. So the next point we're going to find is the winter solstice. So we're going to find 113 degrees on our compass. We're going to point it in the direction and find something on the horizon that we could walk towards. And we already know it's that big tree right over there. So I'm going to start with my 4 paces from here. And 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. And I stick that in the ground. Now what I have is a full year's worth of sunrise and sunset. By the way, I want to give you one more interesting fact. These points where the sun rises and sunsets throughout the year are so important that if you look on a globe, you'll actually see a line for the furthest that the sun rises north and the furthest that it rises south. In the north, it's called the Tropic of Cancer. And in the south, it's called the Tropic of Capricorn. So if you ever wondered where those lines on the globe came from, it has to do with astronomy and the seasons and where the sun rises. So we actually did a little more science than I was planning on doing. I just really enjoy this stuff, so I thought I would share it with you. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go out on the landscape and see if we can find signs of autumn in the natural world around us. Now if you're from North Carolina, here's a plant that you probably recognize. This is called a red spider lily, a very beautiful flower that blooms right around the time of the autumnal equinox. As a matter of fact, this one actually started to flower right on the equinox. So it's a pretty common plant that most people recognize. When you see this blooming, you know that autumn is here or it's close. Here's a plant that many of you know as poke salad. And the plant is a poke plant, and some people call it pokeberry. This time of the year, in the autumn, again we are about a week into the autumnal equinox. Over the summertime, this plant has beautiful green leaves. The flowers are white in color. Then the berries form. The berries stay a green color. Then they eventually turn purple. But by the time the autumn comes, the berries are really, really dark purple, and they start to dry out, and the plant starts to lose its leaves. As you can see, there aren't very many leaves on this plant right now. The ones that are there are all brown, but the berries are all dark purple. So here's a pretty good example of some nice, plump, juicy berries. And actually right next to that, you could see some berries that are already starting to dry up and get ready to fall or get ready to be eaten by birds. This plant is called dog fennel, and in the summertime it's a bright green color, and as the autumn approaches, the stem and the leaves start to turn a nice maroon, nice sort of reddish color. Now dog fennel is a pretty interesting plant. It's called, I don't know why it's called dog, but it's called fennel certainly by the taste and smell of it. So this plant, if you break a piece off and crumble it in your fingers and smell it, it smells just like fennel, and it can actually be used as a spice. This plant has what I consider one of the most beautiful flowers that you'll find in North Carolina. And this is called a passion flower. Many people down south here know it as maypop. And what I've read is that the reason it's called passion flower is because if you look at the center here, you notice how it radiates. It looks like a crown surrounding the stamens and pestils. It reminds people of the Passion of Christ. And as I zoom out, you can actually see what the leaves of the passion flower look like. So these leaves have 3 lobes. Sometimes people call them fingers. So that's one of the easiest ways, besides the flower obviously, is to identify this vine. So this plant is a vine, and as you can see, it's climbing all over the other plants in this natural area. Once those beautiful flowers get pollinated, then the fruit starts to grow. And at this time of the year, most of the fruit are still green and hanging on the vine. But later on in the fall, these will start to turn a little bit of a yellow color. And I have a couple here that are close to the ground that are actually starting to turn a little yellow. As you can see by the amount of fruit hanging on this vine, these plants can be pretty prolific when it comes to creating fruit. So what's interesting about this vine is when these fruits are ready to eat, they'll actually fall off the vine. And I've tried to eat them before they've fallen off, and they're just not good. And this one, actually, I pulled off the vine just to show you what they look like inside. So what you do is, if you pop these open, inside are a whole bunch of seeds, and these seeds are covered in like a gelatin. And the seeds are the part you eat. You don't eat the outside part. You eat the seeds. Now I'll try these. Yeah, they're definitely not ripe. They don't taste really very good at all. But when these are ripe, they have a really delicious taste to them. And I come out here and pick lots and lots of these. They're really, really good. They're delicious and they're really good for you. So this plant is a pretty magnificent plant. This is called burdock. And one of the distinguishing characteristics of this plant is the size of the leaves. As you can see, this leaf is almost as long as my arm. And when this gets bigger, the leaves will even be bigger and actually be as long as my arm. Now this plant is a biennial, which means it takes 2 years to flower. So right now this is the first year growth, and actually right behind it we have the second year growth that is actually flowered and has gone to seed already. So this is a burdock plant that has already flowered and gone to seed. They have these beautiful thistle-like flowers. And now that it's autumn, the plant has completely died back and the seed pods are ready to disperse their seeds. And one of the interesting things about this plant is the seed pods have these little hooks on them. And these little hooks are actually where they got the idea for Velcro. And as you can see, they stick to anything that touches them. So the reason these seed pods have these hooks is these seeds are distributed by animals. An animal will walk by here, the little hooks will grab onto their fur, and wherever the animal goes, the seeds go. Eventually, this starts to irritate the animal, and the animal will pull the seed pod off and just discard it on the ground, and that's where the next year's burdock plants are going to grow. I just wanted to show you a close-up of the seed pods, and you can see how really sticky they look. Not sticky like glue sticky, but they'll grab onto just about anything that they touch. And if I open up one of these seed pods, we can see the seeds inside. And each one of these, of course, can become a complete burdock plant. And that's how this plant distributes its seeds and continues its survival. This tree is a black walnut tree. And this tree shows us the time of the year because it's one of the first trees to lose its leaves in the autumn. You can see this tree has lost a lot of its leaves. The rest of the leaves have turned yellow. So this is one of the easiest trees to find on the landscape in the autumn because of the fact that it loses its leaves much earlier than most trees. So this tree's real claim to fame, besides the fact that it has beautiful wood that's prized by cabinet makers and woodworkers alike, are the abundant fruits. And inside these green fruits is a big walnut. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to get those walnuts out and process them and eat them. As you can see by looking on the ground under this tree, these fruits have already started to fall. And when they do fall, they will lay on the ground and turn from green to a dark brown color. What I'm going to do now is we're going to collect a few of these and take them up to the house. I collected a bunch of the black walnuts and I brought them up to my house, and I'm going to show you how I process them. Now the first thing you need to do to get to the nut is to remove this green husk. Now it's a relatively easy job to remove most of the husk, but one thing about black walnut husks is they make a really good dye. So I highly recommend that if you're going to do this with your hands, you should wear some kind of a glove to protect your hands, or your hands will become brown almost instantly. So you find a nice hard surface, and basically all you do is you crush the nut like so. And this is the husk right here, and this is the nut. It's still not clean enough to actually use, so what I do is I throw these in a bucket, And once I get all of these done, I'm going to show you what I do while they're in the bucket. So I removed all the husks and I threw the nuts in this bucket, and as you can see, even the glove is instantly turned brown. Now, I don't usually throw these away. I take these, I put them in a bucket, I cover them with water, and let them sit there for a couple of weeks. The water will get a really, really dark brown, and that can be used to dye things. And I've dyed pants and shirts, I've made tie-dye shirts with them, I've dyed wood. So this is a really good natural dye. The next step is to add water to this bucket, and you want to just cover the nuts just over the top. You don't want to put a lot of water in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stick and agitate this and continue to do that until the water comes out clear. So let me get some water and I'll be right back. So now that I have water in the bucket, basically all you do is you just stir and you stir and stir, and you need to agitate that. The idea is to get the black walnuts to rub against each other to get the rest of the extra husk off. And you literally have to do this about 20 times and change the water in between. As you can see, the water is a dark brown, and you want the water to come out as clear as possible, so you can imagine that takes a lot of time. So I have some nuts that I had processed a couple of days ago, and I took the husks and I put them in water, and you can see how dark that water is, and that could be used for dye, to dye clothes or wool or anything you really want to. It even works on wood really well. I'm going to put this aside. So these are the black walnuts that I harvested and processed the other day. Now, one of the reasons you don't find black walnuts in the store is because they're extremely hard. You can't use a nutcracker to break them open. What you have to do is find yourself a hard surface, get a nice strong hammer, and break them gently. And when you break them, you could see the nut inside. This is a piece right here, and these things are just really delicious, and they're extremely good for you. So you pick those out. Now I would hit this again to break the side out, and a lot of times you'll need a nut pick to get those out, but I know it's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it, because if you ever make pancakes or muffins with black walnuts in it, it's a real treat. And again, this is the only time you could do this is in the autumn and into the winter. And of course, one thing you need to do is to beat the squirrels to the walnuts. So here's another tree that I love to find in the fall. This is a persimmon tree. And like the black walnut tree, the fruits are ready in the fall. A lot of times with these persimmons, you have to wait till it gets cold and the frost kind of nips the fruit to make them sweet. But this tree, I found out that when the fruits fall to the ground, they're pretty much ready. I picked a couple up the other day, and they were really, really sweet. So I was very happy to find I didn't have to wait for the really, really cold weather. But I would think the majority of these I'm going to have to wait until it gets a little bit colder. One of the things that's real interesting about trees is they don't always produce the same amount of fruits every year. For instance, this tree last year had almost no fruits on it. And you can see this year it's really plentiful. There are some people who say that that means that the tree knows that it's going to be a hard winter and it produces a lot of fruits for the animals. I don't know how true that is. Here's a bunch of fruit that has fallen from the tree, and I'm going to take these home and check them out. It looks like most of them are pretty ripe. So far in this video, we've been talking mostly about plants. Now, animals also have to survive the seasons and do different things like migrate, for instance. You can think about some birds who stay here in North Carolina, and some birds that actually migrate and go down south because their food source is not available in the wintertime. Well, here's a really cool spider, and this is called a black and yellow argiope. People also call it a garden spider. Animals also follow the seasons. For instance, there are some animals that can't find food in the wintertime, so they have to migrate. There are some animals that will bury themselves underground to survive the winter. I find it really interesting that you never see these spiders in the summertime, but they do come around. You start to see them in the autumn. And this guy's a pretty big one. He's been around a while. But again, they don't come out, and they're not visible until the autumn. And they're a good indicator of what time of year it is. This spider right here, it mates in the autumn and leaves an egg sac. Here are 2 egg sacs from the black and yellow argiope. Inside these egg sacs are eggs that'll hatch into babies, and they'll overwinter until the spring. And in the springtime they'll hatch, and the ones that'll survive will grow, and in the autumn they'll start to cycle all over again. This colorful plant is called bittersweet, and bittersweet is a vine. Throughout the summer it has nice dark green leaves on it. Then the berries start to form. The berries are yellow up until the autumn. In the autumn, the yellow husk of the berries actually opens up and reveals the orange berry inside. And a lot of people actually use this because of the time of the year. You know, you think of Halloween, you think of autumn as orange, you know, the leaves changing and so on. People like to take this plant and actually make wreaths out of it. And it's really very beautiful. Unfortunately, most people think of this vine as an invasive species, and they do what they can to destroy it. I like to look at things to see how they fit into the scheme of nature. These berries are a very important food source for birds, and when they fall to the ground, for rodents and insects that still might be active at this time of the year. So not only is it pretty and colorful at this time of the year, but it also has its use, of course, in nature. One last bit of information about the bittersweet. These berries are toxic, so you don't want to eat them. And I've read that they got their name from the fact that the berries taste sweet, but the bitter part is you get sick after you eat them. Now, they're not poisonous, they're not going to kill you, they'll make you sick though. So just be cautious. Coincidentally, this bittersweet vine is actually growing on a Bradford pear. Bradford pears are those trees in the springtime that are filled with white flowers. They're one of the first flowers to bloom in the springtime on a tree, and it really makes the landscape beautiful. Most people don't realize that some of these Bradford pears will actually produce fruit. Like the persimmons and other trees like crab apples, for instance, these berries or fruits will not really be edible until after the first frost. Right now they're very hard, they're very sour, and most people don't like them. As a matter of fact, this is another one of those trees that people consider an invasive species and cut down all the time. Here's another wild flower that blooms right around the time of the autumnal equinox. This is called goldenrod, and its bright yellow flowers dot fields all over North Carolina this time of the year. It's a beautiful plant, and it's a great pollinator. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't like this plant because it blooms around the same time that most people start to get hay fever and allergies, their fall allergies. But it turns out that goldenrod is not the culprit. The pollen in goldenrod is too heavy to be airborne, and it's insect pollinated. There are other plants like ragweed that also bloom at the same time as the goldenrod, and that pollen is actually airborne, and that's what people are allergic to. But the fact that this is so prominent on the landscape, it kind of gets a bad rap. This is one of the beautiful wildflowers that blooms almost right on the equinox. So this time of the year there aren't very many wildflowers that bloom. And the fact that these bloom when it's getting cooler gives the butterflies and bees and other pollinators a chance, like sort of one last chance to get food before it's time to either migrate or do whatever they need to do to survive the winter. This is the time of year monarch butterflies migrate, and this is a great plant to help nourish them on their travels. And as you can see, this field is just filled with these asters. I come out here a lot to take pictures of butterflies and other pollinators. This is a great place to come if you're into photography. What I'd like to do now is to show you some previous footage of some of the butterflies that come and visit these flowers in the autumn. Enjoy it. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on this little adventure. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you walked away with something that you didn't know before. I hope you take the time to go out and do some nature observations on your own, and enjoy the beauty of nature. Thanks again for joining me. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.